I never believed one glass of wine could change my life. Then again, I never thought I'd ruin a €2 million painting either. The evening smelled like money and old ambition. The Palacio de Juda was glowing under chandeliers, and I felt like an intruder in my own skin. Everyone there looked polished, fluent in charm, and dipped in wealth. I was just the girl hired to make sure the Renaissance canvas hanging on the marble wall didn't fall apart before the auction ended. And yet, somehow, I was the one who destroyed it. It happened in slow motion. My elbow brushed against a passing waiter's tray. The tray collided with a tall crystal flute, and deep red wine splashed like liquid fire across the center of the painting. The gasp that followed was collective, a single sharp intake of horror that froze the entire hall. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might shatter the glass around me. Then I heard him. A low, unbothered voice cut through the whispers. "Leave it," he said, calm and commanding. "I'm the owner." Everyone turned. That was the first time I saw Luca Bianchi. He wasn't dressed like the others. No glitter, no tie. Just a dark suit, open collar, and a look that could silence a storm. His eyes, gray, cold, unblinking, met mine across the room. And instead of anger, I saw curiosity. The kind that makes you want to look away but can't. "I'm so sorry," I stammered. My throat burned. I can fix it. Please, I can." He raised a hand, stopping me. "You're the restorer, aren't you?" His Italian accent was faint but hypnotic. "Clara Mendez." The fact that he knew my name sent a shiver down my spine. "Yes," I whispered. "How do you?" I read the catalog, and now, it seems, I've met the woman who just made my evening unforgettable. People laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. He smiled, barely, and that tiny movement changed everything. He didn't scold me. He didn't even look at the ruined painting again. He just looked at me, as if the art he cared about most was standing right there, drenched in guilt. Then he stepped closer. "Don't worry," he said softly, low enough that only I could hear. "Nothing that bleeds is beyond repair." I didn't know if he was talking about the canvas or about me. The next morning, I expected a call from the auction house firing me. What I got instead was an envelope delivered to my apartment. Inside, a first-class train ticket to Florence and a handwritten note in elegant black ink. "Miss Mendez, your hands owe me a masterpiece. You will find one waiting in Tuscany. L.B." I should have ignored it. I told myself that for hours. But the memory of his voice lingered, the way he had looked at me, not with pity, but with interest. Like he'd seen something valuable in my clumsy disaster. So I packed my brushes, my fears, and my half-broken pride. And that's how I ended up crossing the Italian border toward a vineyard I'd never heard of, owned by a man I should never have met. The train slid into Florence at dawn, the city exhaling a breath of gold over the Arno. I changed to a car with blacked-out windows and a driver who said nothing except my name, as if it were a destination rather than a person. The road unfurled southward, olive groves giving way to vineyards marching in green, disciplined rows. It was beautiful in the way old money is, quiet, relentless, confident. The estate rose from the land like it had chosen itself, stone and ivy and archways from another century. A wrought iron gate opened soundlessly, the kind of silence that says everything is oiled and watched. "Miss Mendez," the driver said, stopping in front of a courtyard of crushed white rock. A woman waited on the steps, mid-40s, severe bun, the posture of a violin string. "Signorina, I am Maddalena. Mr. Bianchi asked me to welcome you." The air smelled like warm earth and wine sleeping in barrels. "Mr. Bianchi," I started, and the name tugged at something inside me. "Is he
working?" she said.
"He will see you this evening." She glanced at my case of brushes. "You'll want to wash the dust before the chapel. It prefers its guests humbled." The chapel was small, a stone haven at the edge of the vines. I followed Maddalena past a fountain, past two men in dark suits who pretended to be gardeners but handled pruning shears like they were trained in other tools first. Inside, the chapel was cool and dim. Frescoes flaked like shedding snakeskin. A small, cracked Madonna watched from above a worn altar. "He wants this restored?" I whispered, reverent. The damage was extensive. Smoke stains along the ceiling, a spiderweb of hairline cracks, pigment that had soaked into the masonry like sins. Madalena nodded. "It was damaged by a fire. Years ago. Accident." Her expression didn't move. Fires rarely are. I ran my fingers a breath above the wall, not touching, measuring. Here was a story inside the paint. Time, ash, grief. I wondered what grief belonged to Luca Bianchi. By afternoon, I had my lights set up, a catalog of pigments laid out, and a gentle solvent test planned for a corner no one would notice, no one except me. I lost myself in the steady, monastic rhythm of the work. The world narrows beautifully when you are saving a piece of it. I didn't hear him come in. I felt him, a drop in the pressure, an attention that changed the temperature of the room. "You brought your hands," he said, and the sentence should have been ridiculous. It wasn't. I turned. He leaned against a column, sleeves rolled, a watch I couldn't afford to pronounce catching the last light. His eyes were the same as the night of the auction, unreadable, assessing, a touch amused. I tried not to imagine those eyes watching me spill a fortune. "Mr. Bianchi," I said, too formal, too breathless. "Luca," he corrected. "We are past formality, aren't we?" "No," I said before I could stop myself. "We are barely even acquaintances." The word sounded prim in my mouth. Acquaintances. As if I hadn't dreamed about his careless smile. He smiled again, like a man enjoying a private joke. "Then we should fix that." He approached the fresco, careful not to cast a shadow where I worked. "Will she live? The Madonna?" I glanced up at the cracked serenity of her face. "She'll survive. Maybe she'll even forgive us for what we've done to her." "Nobody forgives completely," he said softly. "Not even the saints." We stood in a silence that was not empty. Then, dinner.
"8," he said.
"Wear something that makes you feel like you belong here." I opened my mouth to tell him I would wear what I owned and belong anyway, but he was already leaving, his hands in his pockets, his shape folding into the dusk. On the way out, he touched the old pew with his fingers. The gesture was so intimate I almost looked away. Dinner was outside, under trellises wrapped in climbing roses and a sky so sudden with stars it felt theatrical. Long tables had been set, but only one was for us. 2 plates, 2 glasses, white linen. The vineyard breathed around us. Somewhere, a radio murmured old Italian songs. "You live like this," I said, startled into honesty. "Every night."
"No," he said.
"Some nights, the sky refuses to perform."
He poured me wine.
I hesitated, memory flashing red across a canvas in Lisbon. "I don't."
"I remember," he said.
But I also remember saying, "Nothing that bleeds is beyond repair." "Are you always like this?" I asked, making metaphors about damage. "Only when the company deserves poetry." It should have been slick. It wasn't. His voice folded around the words like something hand-stitched. He asked about art, about my work, about Lisbon's salt-heavy light. I asked about wine, and he told me about the patient violence of vines, how you have to cut them to save them, to keep them from choking on their own abundance. Pruning, he said, was a mercy. At some point, the head of security approached, a compact man with a face like granite. "Renzo," Lucas said by way of introduction. "He thinks of danger the way I think of weather, constant, but manageable." Renzo nodded to me, scanning the edges of the night. "The chapel is a weak point," he said in Italian. "Too many doors." "We'll lock them," Luca said. "And we won't burn history twice." He looked at me when he said it, and I knew the fire that had scarred the chapel mattered to him in ways paint could not describe. "Accident?" I asked again. Luca's gaze flicked to Renzo, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. Luca turned back to me, wine warming the steel in his eyes. "Sometimes people like to remind you that everything you love can turn to smoke." The night grew quiet around the sentence. I swallowed. "And you?" "I'm learning to love things that can't be so easily burned," he said. His attention landed on me like a hand to the throat, not violent, but impossible to ignore. The candle between us guttered then steadied, as if deciding how bold to be. "Tell me something true, Clara," he said, leaning back, giving me space that felt like a dare. I could have said anything. The truth I chose surprised even me. "Crowds make me feel like I'm drowning." He nodded slowly. "Good. I'll keep you where you can breathe." It was an offer and a promise and a warning, all at once. When I returned to my room, the window was open. The curtain sighed like someone had just left. On the nightstand lay a small, leather-bound book and a note pinned under a silver olive leaf. "For your hands, for your ghosts."
L.
Inside the book, blank pages, heavy paper that loved ink. I didn't sleep. I watched the moon turn the vineyard into a map and listened to the house settle into its bones. Something had shifted. The world was still the same shape, but I was standing in a different place on the map. Days took on a rhythm. Chapel in the morning, a lunch so simple and good it felt like a secret, bread from somewhere that knew my name, tomatoes that tasted like red sunlight, then the long, meditative afternoon of brush against wall while birds wrote invisible music in the vines. Luca did not hover. He appeared like weather, sometimes bright, sometimes shadow, sometimes storm at a distance. When he was near, I could feel his attention like static. When he was gone, the air felt thin. I told myself I was imagining all of it. It's amazing what you can rationalize when the alternative is drowning. On the third day, I found a hairline fissure along the north wall that wasn't in my initial survey. New damage. Fresh stress. I traced it to the edge of the frame, then to a corner of the chapel where the stone had been hastily patched. "Renzo," I called, and he appeared as if he'd been there the whole time. "This wall," I said. "Who touched it recently?"
His jaw tightened.
"No one." "Stone doesn't lie," I said. "Someone did." He moved closer, eyes scanning, hand hovering above his hip, where a gun would be if this were a movie and I were not willfully pretending otherwise. "I'll ask." He left and Luca arrived, like the day had turned a page. I told him about the fracture. He listened, head tilted. Could it be the heat? The summer?
"It could," I said.
"But it isn't." I hesitated. "Did you tell anyone I'm here?" The question made something sharp open in his expression.
"No," he said.
"But someone else did."
"Who?"
"My enemies are traditional," he said lightly. "They introduce themselves with smoke, with messages carved where you won't miss them." The world swayed. "And I'm what? Collateral?" He took a step closer, the gentleness of it somehow more dangerous than a shout. "You're an artist in a chapel, Clara. That is all you are to anyone except me." "Except you?" The words were out before pride could stop them. "Except me," he said simply. We stood too close, the fresco a witness, the Madonna almost smiling in her cracked way, as if she knew people like us make altars out of the wrong things all the time. "Leave," he said suddenly. "Tonight.
"If you want to."
I'll pay you double for your trouble and triple for my arrogance. But if you stay, I will do what is necessary to keep you safe. Understand what that means before you decide." The part of me that has always run toward fire instead of away from it answered for me. "I'm staying," I said. "The Madonna deserves a second chance." I held his gaze. "Maybe we do, too." Something in him softened. Only a little. Enough to be more dangerous. That night, I dreamed of Lisbon's river and Tuscan flames, of hands that smelled like wine and smoke, of a voice saying nothing that bleeds is beyond repair, over and over, until the sentence became a prayer. We pretended normalcy, with the stubbornness of children. I worked, he worked. The estate hummed. Men we didn't see were everywhere, a choreography of protection that made honesty impossible. At midday, Luca arrived at the chapel carrying 2 espressos. He handed me one with a look that asked a question I wasn't ready to answer. "Take a break," he said. "You've been breathing dust for hours." We sat on the steps in a slice of shade. The espresso was strong enough to steady the world. "Why the chapel?" I asked. "It was a family shrine." "It was a promise," he said. "To whom?"
"To my mother," he said.
She liked to light a candle when the house felt too loud. After she died, the house never stopped shouting. I set my cup down. And the fire? My father's ghost, he said dryly. He didn't like her quiet. He preferred thunder. I thought of wine cellars and bribes and families that run themselves like small countries. And you? I like the sound after thunder, he said. When everything remembers itself. We were quiet, the good kind. He looked at my hands. I looked at his. Clara, he said. There is a charity gala in 3 days. It is inconvenient, but unavoidable. I would like you there. I nearly laughed. You're inviting a restorer to a gala? I'm inviting the woman who ruined a painting and saved a Madonna, he said. Then, softer. And I'd rather keep you where I can see you. Because of the fracture. Because of all the fractures, he said. I wanted to tell him I hate crowds. I wanted to tell him that when I am looked at by too many eyes, I feel like glass, clear and fragile and made for breaking. I wanted to say yes anyway. Yes, I said. He smiled. It wasn't a seduction this time. It was relief. Good, he said. Wear something that makes the room confess its sins. I choked on my espresso. That's your strategy? Dress me like an absolution? My strategy is to remind the room what beauty looks like when it doesn't need to apologize for existing. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. He leaned in just a fraction, not enough to touch, enough to remind. The air between us developed a pulse. Ours shared. Careful, I said softly. You're very good at this. At what? Making disaster sound like destiny. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Maybe it is both. The dress Madalena found was black and simple, as if it had been cut from a quiet night sky. I pinned my hair back. I did not look like I belonged, but I looked like I had chosen to be there. Sometimes, that's the same thing. The gala was on the main terrace, the estate recast as theater. Lights climbed the columns. Music braided through conversations. Waiters moved like chess pieces. And at the far end, Luca in a tuxedo, the easy center of gravity, the king who doesn't need a crown because the board knows him. When he saw me, the table around him blurred. He approached with a deliberate unhurriedness that made my pulse misbehave. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. You confessed, he said. The room noticed. I hate this. I confessed, already breathless with it. The eyes. Then look at me, he said. And let them look at me looking at you. It was a superpower I hadn't known existed. The crowd thinned into wallpaper. All that remained was the shelf of his collarbone, the shadow at his jaw, the way his hand hovered at the small of my back without touching, asking the most old-fashioned question in the world. May I? He asked. Yes, I said, and his palm found the place electricity waits. We danced. I am not a dancer. We didn't need to be good. We needed to be near. He moved like someone who had long ago memorized the physics of control and finally decided to let them go. I followed. For the length of a song. There were no enemies, no fires, no frescoes falling apart. There was only a woman who hated crowds and a man who looked at her until the crowd surrendered. The song ended to polite applause. We did not let go immediately. Renzo materialized. A word, he said in Italian. Not to me. Luca's gaze sharpened.
Now,
Renzo said. Luca's hand squeezed mine once, a message in pressure.
Wait. Breathe.
Don't move. He stepped away with Renzo toward the edge of the terrace, where decorative hedges turned into darkness. I took a breath. Then another. I reached for a glass of water. Clara, yes. A man slid beside me, smooth and pale, a smile that hadn't met a mirror he didn't trust. His accent was European in the way that means everywhere and nowhere. I'm Mark Vidal, investor, admirer of art, admirer, tonight, of you. I'm here as staff, I said. Of course, he said, grin widening. And Cinderella was at the ball, as what, exactly? He lifted his glass at my dress, at the way my skin felt too tight. Such a waste, he murmured, leaning in. For someone like you to hide behind walls and paint. I like walls, I said. They keep things out. They keep things in, he corrected. Especially girls from Lisbon, who think they can fix the world if they fix one saint's face. His smile thinned. Tell Luca the chapel is a mistake. Some ghosts enjoy the attention. Best to let them sleep. He turned away, already bored, already finished with me. The water in my glass trembled. Luca returned, something cold pressed over the warmth he wore so well. What did it all say? He asked. That I should leave the dead alone. I met his eyes. Is he the fire? He's the match and the hand that holds it, Luca said. And he's very good at pretending to warm you while he watches you burn. Why is he here? Because the world is more polite than it should be. The night swung on. A charity speech. Laughter like bells. The taste of fear in new wine. When the fireworks started over the far field, I let myself look up like a child. Gold blossomed into blue, into white, into smoke. Beautiful, I said. Distraction, Luca said, already moving. Renzo. The explosion that followed wasn't in the sky. It was in the direction of the chapel. For a second, the terrace became a still life of horror. Then motion returned with violence.
People ran.
Shouts carved the velvet of the night. Renzo yelled into a radio I couldn't see. Luca's hand found mine, and then we were sprinting across gravel, through the slice of garden, down the slope that led to the stone building that had spent days teaching me how to breathe. A wash of orange lit the windows. Smoke was a hand down the throat. No, I heard myself say, and it wasn't a word so much as a refusal of fate. Renzo reached the door first, already swinging a fire extinguisher, another man unrolling a hose like a whipped snake. Back, someone shouted. The roof. Luca tried to go in. Renzo grabbed him by the lapels. I moved without thinking, skirt bunched in my fists, shoulder at the side door, only I knew stuck unless you kissed it in the right spot. Clara. Luca's voice cracked across my name. Stop. But the door opened because the chapel loved me, because some places forgive you before you earn it. Heat slapped my skin. I dropped low, the way every film taught me, every instinct doubted. Smoke throbbed. The fire was on the north wall, of course, the fracture, the hint, the message. The Madonna's face was a blur behind a veil of black. No, I said again. I wet my shawl in the font and pressed it to my mouth, the irony not lost even now. I aimed the extinguisher at the base of the flames the way a pragmatic uncle once taught me in a kitchen we'd almost lost to a careless pan. The whoosh was a different kind of thunder. Fire hissed, fell back, lunged again. Arms rose around me, strong and inexorable. I was lifted, hauled backward, the extinguisher torn from my grip, a body sheltering mine. Luca. He carried me like a thief steals a priceless thing, not delicately, but with terrified efficiency. Outside, night air was a miracle. I coughed until my ribs protested. He held me through it, jaw clenched so tight, I thought it might crack. You don't get to run into burning buildings, Kara, he said, the endearment like a bandage and a reprimand stitched together. That privilege is mine. The fresco. I started choking. Saved, Renzo called hoarsely, white foam blossoming inside the chapel. Scorched but saved. I sagged. Luca's arms tightened, as if my relief was something he could pocket and keep. Vidal stood at the edge of the chaos, a silhouette with a glass still in his hand. He lifted it at us, a toast to our survival, to our stupidity, to his message received. Luca's voice went quiet and deadly. Enough politeness, he said. They wrapped a blanket around me. Someone pressed a cup of water into my hands. It shook like it belonged to someone else. Renzo barked orders. Men moved. Sirens wailed distantly, an insult to countryside's speed limits. Luca crouched in front of me, tuxedo ash-dusted, hair uncharacteristically disobedient. He touched my jaw with fingers that didn't tremble. Look at me, he said, not as command but as tether. You're here. I'm here, I echoed. His thumb traced the edge of my lip, then moved away, as if he'd forgotten himself. I should send you home. You should try, I said, finding a spark of myself in the wreckage. I'm not done. He squeezed his eyes shut briefly, a prayer to a saint I'd just watched choke. When he opened them, something risky lived there. You said you were staying. I believed you. His throat moved. But I didn't intend for staying to mean this. Intentions, I said softly, are the easiest things to burn. He huffed out a breath that wasn't a laugh. The sirens cut off. The fire crews took over the performance, efficient and late. Madalena appeared, pale and furious and mothering, pressing damp cloths at my wrists, muttering about foolish girls and foolish men and saints who collect the smoke of our decisions. Later, hours or minutes, time had melted. I stood inside the chapel again. The north wall was a patchwork of hurt, but the Madonna was there, a survivor with soot on her halo. I touched the air before her face and thanked every god I don't believe in. Luca stood beside me, shoulder almost touching mine, the heat of him an echo of the fire we'd stolen from. Vidal is finished, he said, not to me but to the room. He doesn't know it yet. You'll escalate, I said. He'll escalate more. Only if I let him breathe, he said, and there was the man people whispered about, the one who could close his hand around an empire's throat and make it smile while it suffocated. I turned to him. You said you wanted to love things that didn't burn. I do, he said, eyes on me. That's why the fire ends here. He didn't kiss me. The space between us was a long inhale. He lifted my hand, turned it palm up, pressed his mouth to the place where everyone's pulse tells the truth. It was not a kiss. It was a vow disguised as gratitude. Tomorrow, he said, we rebuild. And tonight? I asked, surprised by the hush of my own voice. Tonight, he said, we admit what's already true. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The chapel finished it for him, stone and paint and surviving light. Outside, the vineyard settled, the vines practicing the patience they'd mastered for centuries. Inside, we stood like two people who had stopped arguing with their gravity. I found his eyes.
He found mine.
The world clicked into place. Nothing that bleeds is beyond repair, he had told me. Tonight, we both decided to believe it.